Police and fire pension reform in all cities and municipalities in Pennsylvania is critical because it is the largest financial burden being placed on local residents. And as that continues to grow, that burden becomes so rocky that more and more municipalities will be filing Act 47 financial distress.
Well, pension reform for the uniform fire and police is essential for a city like Reading that's in Act 47, and it's in Act 47 because it found itself in fiscal distress. So when you take a look at the reasons why they're in fiscal distress, it's their escalating personnel costs, which are primarily police and fire. And the escalation factor within that is the pension plans. Now, benefits play a role, salaries play a role, but overwhelmingly the escalation in the costs is the pension costs, and it's drowning our cities, and it's making our cities unable to function.
Pension reform is critical for municipalities because of an overwhelming, large, unfunded liability that many municipalities have to carry. So those costs have to be paid before any other service is provided. That's essentially a constitutional provision. And the problem is that when you're putting so much money into past liabilities of police and firefighters, you have less money for current services. And that means you either have to increase taxes or you have to cut those current services. Either one is a problem for our businesses and for the citizens that live in these communities.
Pension reform for uniform, fire, and police is critical, particularly for the city of York. In Pennsylvania, actually all cities in the Commonwealth would be tremendously benefited by some sort of reform. It is critical because we can't sustain the costs that is needed to cover it. It comes directly from our general fund, and our general fund is only made up of property taxes of our residents, and with so much property tax exempt also in the city of York, that general fund is shrinking every year, and our taxpayers cannot keep up with it, and they are losing homes in the process.
Because we're currently on a path that is not sustainable. If we keep going in the direction that we're headed, our communities, one after another, are going to be lining up to go into Act 47, and distressed communities across our Commonwealth is just not acceptable. We can't keep our communities safe if we're reducing our police forces, if we're reducing our fire protection services. And reality is that that's what communities are going to have to face with, either that or raising their tax structure significantly.
You have a virtually unwinnable situation for many of these municipalities. So it's a downward spiral that really can only end ultimately potentially in bankruptcy. That's a terrible situation for a region to face.
The cost for pension for our public safety uniform personnel in the city of York right now is approximately 68% of our budget in the year 2014. We're expecting that for 2015 to be increased by almost 6%, so a total of 74% of our budget out of our general fund.
Half of our general fund budget is eaten up by the police department. It's growing exponentially every year. Our general fund budget is $3.5 million. The police budget's $1.9 million. When you look at our pension obligation, just our pension obligation, it's about $78,000 a year, and it's growing. Next year it'll be $125,000. And when healthcare benefits are rolled into the pension costs, our obligation goes up by $4 million, which is about 25% of the pension fund.
For Easton, a city of only 30,000 population, our unfunded liability is almost $1 million, $100,000 per person. It's $25 million. When I took office in 2008, we were paying $600,000 a year towards that legacy cost. This year is $3.8 million. Next year's $4.3 million. That's a substantial amount of money for a small community to have to pay.
That number continues to inch up and inch up as a percentage of your overall budget. And obviously, it leads to other services being cut, quality of life type things, recreation programs, streetscape projects, all get put aside to pay for these public pension costs.
So should the taxpayers be concerned? Well, I'd ask the people who want the potholes filled whether they should be concerned. It means other things that local government cannot do. It also means higher taxes. On the local level, you don't have an opportunity or the luxury of being ideological. You have to be pragmatic. You have to solve problems.
Do you want to have fewer parks? Do you want to have your streets plowed? Do you want to have your lawns mowed? Do you want to have all the other municipal services that we provide negatively affected because of this unfunded liability? It's a huge albatross around our necks that needs to be resolved. We maintain and hold in the highest level of regard and respect the professionalism, the integrity, the character of the police officers who work in our respective communities. But the demand on them is going to increase if we don't get some relief, because there's going to be fewer of them dealing with an increasing number of calls and responsibilities.
We don't have the ability to raise additional revenues to cover those costs, so therefore we have to cut services. And that, I worry about endangering the lives and well-being of our citizens when we have to do that.
Because of the costs that our city has been facing, we've actually had to reduce the number of police officers. We had 200 police officers, we're down to 160, because that's all we can afford.
Even though you live or you work in a community that you think doesn't have issues with pension costs for public safety, good chance is there are those issues. And eventually, every community in this Commonwealth is going to face having to deal with these overriding costs.